Hi, I'm Stephen Slate of Slate Digital,
And I'm Alex Owana of Slate Digital.
and we are talking today about the Virtual Console Collection plugin. It's a plugin for RTAS, AAX, VST, AU. It's 32-bit, 64-bit on the iLock 2 platform. And it's a really important plugin for me because it's the plugin that made me finally understand that the industry could really work digitally just as well as it could in the analog domain.
It makes sense that we're here at Vintage King talking about this because, both you and I started out mixing on consoles and mixing to tape and, doing everything in the analog domain where you had to have, whether you liked it or not, an analog signal path, from the beginning all the way to the end. So it'd come through a channel, it gets summed through the analog console's summing section, and then get combined into stereo, and then that's what you'd record.
And of course, doing that signal path, the audio has a certain tone of that console. I remember one of the first studios I worked at had one room which was a Neve room and one room that was an SSL room. And if it was an aggressive, poppy, rock band, we would always mix them in the SSL room because it was just that tight and punchy, fast sound. And if it was a vibey 70s kind of, old school kind of vibe rock band, we would always mix them in the Neve console because the Neve has that warm, fat, vibey tone.
Right, or you mix and match. Maybe you'd track some tracks through the Neve and then mix on the SSL to get the thickness of the Neve going in, and then SSL on the back end. And I think you're talking about that because the VCC can do all those things.
Well, my point is that people use analog consoles as a tone machine, not just as the functionality to mix channels, not just as a utility machine. They use it as part of their tone because a console is a tone instrument. When you're mixing signals into this console, you will have a dynamic, nonlinear instrument that's adding different stuff. I mean, and here's what a console adds. It adds harmonics, saturation, harmonic distortion, phase shifts, all these things
can limit the transients as you push it harder.
Sure, due to the saturation. And all of these things, our ear hears as tonality. So when someone says, hey, I love the sound of that Neve console, what they're saying is, I like the sound of that Neve's imperfections, really, the harmonic distortions. Right. I love the sound of its noise, its phase shift, its component saturations. So what we said is, what if we took this nonlinear reaction that these circuits and these consoles provide, and we put it inside of a plugin?
Well, let me stop you 1 second, because there was this awful period when we where we were like, oh, we can mix everything in the computer now. Wow, this is amazing, and I've got all this power and this freedom. I can do it at home, and I can, I don't have to go to the expensive studio and use the console. But then the results were not only disappointing, but I was literally crying as an engineer, going, well, I can't make a good sounding record anymore. And so, I mean, I think the motivation, if I understand
you were really
right,
crying. Did you really cry?
I was sad. No, I was sad because
so
I'm
like,
I can't make a good sounding record with this totally clean thing. It was just such a shocking transition to go from working on consoles to having to work entirely in the box with plugins that didn't give you some of those nonlinearities, some of that extra tonal and harmonic richness. And so, I mean, when you came out with the VCC, this is before I started working with Slate Digital. It was literally an answer to my prayers, because it was like, this is exactly the kind of tool I need for mixing in the box, because I know how records get to be big sounding and fat sounding and vibey sounding and rich, and what some people don't realize is that these transformers and circuits and all this stuff, it's literally adding more music to the music. You take a signal that is what it is coming in from the mic, and you color it with these distortions, these imperfections, and literally it is compounding what you have there and making it into more of what you started with.
And I concur. I mean, I too have a vintage analog desk, and I would do mixes on that, and I would love the sound I'd get out of my desk. But then when it came time to try to get into the new way of working with digital, and I would try to mix in the box, I didn't cry because I'm a grown man, but I was just upset that I wasn't getting all this cool vibe and tone. So with the Virtual Console Collection, Slate Digital's co-founder, Fabrice Gabriel, who is probably the most brilliant DSP engineer I've ever met and ever will meet.
I mean, he's like the Rupert Neve of
digital,
of analog or of digital coding.
Of course. He examined the entire circuit path of 5 of the most amazing vintage consoles in the industry. And he modeled the entire signal path right from the channel to the summing, even to deep distortion. So with the virtual console collection, you put the channel plugin on all of your channels in your DAW, and you put the mix bus plugin on the first insert of your master fader, and then you just mix. You choose your console, and you just mix, and the result is that you get this vibe and this essence of analog, like you've mixed through this analog console.
And you can do something with this that you can't do on a regular analog console, because, I mean, like Stephen was saying at the beginning, you either chose to mix in the Neve room or the SSL room or the API room. But with this, you can say, hey, I want, my drums to go through the Neve section of the console. I want my guitars to go through the API section. Or, you say, well, the snare just sounds better with the API model. And that kind of flexibility, and the thing too is that it is the authentic sound. I mean, you've done tests where you had people, well, you yourself, like you took a session and you put all the tracks through an SSL that was perfectly calibrated down to the 10th of a dB, right? And then
right.
you
and we spent a lot of time calibrating it,
right.
because in order to do a proper A/B test, we had to absolutely zero the analog desk out. And it's hard to zero a vintage analog desk out because, simply putting the faders at 0 and smiling is not enough. We had to actually have outboard
right. You
meters.
measure each one.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
so,
the pan law is different
right.
on every desk. So you do that, and you get everything so it's absolutely perfectly at 0, because you have to be making a fair comparison. And then you print that mix, and then you do the exact same thing with the VCC
right.
on every channel.
And then we just bounce that.
And compare those.
And when we did that, we did that with a lot of pros in the room. And we would have one of the assistants play clips of each out of the box mix that were a console mix,
right.
and in the box mix with a VCC, and we'd say, can you tell us which one is the analog mix and which one is the in the box mix? And no one could. And that was when we finally realized, okay, it's time to release this, because we, the 2 years that we spent developing this plugin was mostly listening tests. It was listening tests and saying, okay, well, the analog console's doing a little bit of this and this that we're not doing, and then Fabrice would tweak it. And then we'd go back to my studio and say, okay, now we're getting close, and when I have it at this level, it's good. But when I start driving channels and I compare it to the driven channels of the analog mix, it's not quite the same. So it sounds good here, but not good here.
Right.
And we would just keep modifying it because the hardest part was not capturing the sound. It was capturing it dynamically. Like I said, the console is a dynamic instrument. So in order to capture the circuit in its true dynamic way, it just took so long and so many listening tests. And I'm happy to say that we finally did it. So you don't need to cry anymore.
Oh, I'm going to tell you about one more time I cried. It was a good cry. It was.
You cried twice?
Yeah, I've cried twice now.
Okay. That's weird.
It was the first time I was able to mix a record in a laptop, and that was when I first started using VCC. And up to then, I'd always needed analog gear, using a summing mixer or patching in stuff, outboard gear, real analog outboard gear. But on this very laptop, actually, I mixed my first record entirely in the box, entirely in Pro Tools, using just VCC and every channel and on the master bus, and then the stock Digi EQ and compressor, and that I made a great sounding record. So I did cry, and it's your fault, but I thank you.
Well, you're welcome, and I also can relate to that because I've mixed on analog consoles my entire life, with the exception of the past year and a half with the VCC. And I can honestly say, and I can tell you my clients have said, that I'm making the best sounding mixes in my life. And it's easier, it's faster, it's more fun. And when a client comes back and says, hey, can we recall this to fix the level of this background vocal, where I used to go, oh, Jesus Christ. I can just go,
we'll bleep
sure,
that out.
click, and loads up and make the change, rebounce it, and, smile. So I don't cry. I'm happy about it.
VCC, making us smile.
Yeah, you got to stop crying now.